Hello everyone, this is Zelda Kelly with PsychicSecrets.com and welcome to this series of Dark Tales with Zelda. Now, the story that I've got to tell you is a completely different story, and I have gone through this over my mind several times. I mean, over the years. This happened years ago. I was actually working for another network years ago. It's no longer around. Some of you may remember it, called Psychic Friends Network. I was living in Virginia in a historic home that was sold to my seafaring husband and myself by a descendant of President Monroe. That was such a great house and a little bit scary. And it had a really creepy, scary basement. And my grandmother visited that basement one day. And I can tell you, that is another story. That's another story. But let's stay on track here, Zelda. Yes, let's do. So, this home in itself held a lot of memories, a lot of energy, a lot of looping. As soon as we bought it, he went out to sea, and I was there for 6 months by myself in a state where I had no family, no friends, and the only thing I had was the psychic line. I stayed signed into that psychic line almost 24 hours a day. Now, keep in mind, this is a time when there was no cell phones, no internet, only landlines, with no call forwarding and no call waiting. That's how that worked back then. So this was a very different time. And it was about, I'm going to say end of September. That's why I think that this is appropriate to tell you this story right now. Years ago, end of September, in a historic, somewhat creepy historic house, and going into October. During one of my late night calls, and usually the calls that came into me were anywhere between 1 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. Eastern. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang and I answered. Now, it was from a gentleman who said his name was Jack. He said he was from Europe, and he had kind of a little accent, and I never really could figure out what the accent was. But he was from Europe and said that he had settled years ago in the 1970s and even earlier in New Orleans. Now, I didn't think a thing about it. He went on to tell me a lot of things, but he had a very hypnotic voice. And as I laid out the cards for him, I thought this was pretty interesting. That represents him, and this represents a parting, a tearing away, and a time when you leave something. And as I laid these cards out, this card represents the Joker in the deck, which meant that he had some things that he wasn't really telling me. And as I went on and talked with him, I could tell that he was a little frustrated because he was trying to trust me with information that he thought that he had. And this is the other Joker, which means that he has, I love these Jokers in this deck. This is the medieval playing card deck, by the way. But this means that he has huge, huge secrets. Things he never revealed. Things that he never told. As time went on and I listened to this hypnotic voice, I became really enchanted with him. We spoke for a long time. Now, quite frankly, as I laid out the cards, I could see that this was not a person that you would want to deal with or really make you mad. But the card tells me that he was who he said he was. So As we went on and we talked, he really did not want me to give him a psychic reading. It seemed as though he just wanted to talk, and that we did. He told me of his ancestors, and he told me of details back in Europe in the 1700s. I mean, details that you would not even think that anyone would know unless they were actually there. He spoke of people as he knew them personally. He actually started to tell me a few things, told me that he had sought me out for years, wanting to find me because he knew one of my relatives in Europe way back, hundreds of years ago. Now, I became more intrigued. I wanted to hear what he had to say. So as time went on, I realized that this man definitely was something that I had never encountered, or a person that I had never encountered before. This person definitely is who he said he was, and he was extremely worldly. Knew things that I wondered how on earth he would know. But the very intriguing part was he started to tell me about my ancestors. Only things that I knew. Only things that would be very, very hard to pick up. He then started to tell me some things that he felt were going to happen in the future. He told me some things about time as went on, what would happen to our world, our system. He actually told me that the Berlin Wall would be coming down. That is something that no one ever even thought about. That was something that happened a few years later. How did he know? As time went on, we spoke of all of these events and details, and he continued to tell me about my ancestry, and especially a woman who was from the UK, who then lived in Edinburgh, and spent then a lot of time in France. And this was in the late 1600s. He described her in a detail that I never thought I would hear come from someone that was not there. It was not as though he read in a book. He gave me her first name. He told me who the ancestors were, my ancestors were, and as we continued on, I realized that he knew more about me, and it started to frighten me. Quite frankly, it started to frighten me. After 2 years, after 2 hours, felt like 2 years, certainly did, after 2 hours of speaking to him, we hung up the phone at about 5:22. I'll never forget it. 5:22 a.m. I've done the numerology on these things. I've done everything on that. I've gone back and really looked in my book. And incidentally, I have a book where I call it my book of secrets. This is the book where I've written all of these things down over the years. This is where I can share in detail. I write down the cards. I write down the conversation right after I have it. So I know, because I knew someday I would want to share it with someone, and I'm very thankful that I can share it with you. This is a very hard time, because I'm going to say, I thought at first that it was a hoax, until I went to my grandmother. After this call, the next day, after I got some rest, I called my grandmother, and I asked her about this woman and who she was, and gave her the first name. And I heard my grandmother gasp as she said, yes, that is my ancestor. who she lived in Edinburgh and moved then to France. And then she ran in a very high society circle, but was shunned because she was a card reader and someone did not like what she had to say. They tried to put her in prison because of it, and back then, if somebody was offended by a reading and didn't want to hear the truth, they could literally try to put you in prison. And she escaped. She fled. Now, Jack, the caller, told me of this. He told me in detail what prison they were trying to put her in, who was trying to do it. And I shared this with my grandmother, and she said no one would ever know because that was almost a family secret that had been handed down. As time went on, my grandmother asked who Jack's last name was. And at that time on the line, I was told to ask for someone's name and write it down, and that's what I did. He gave me the name of Jack Germain. I thought that was pretty intriguing. He was very hypnotic. I found myself being very lured in, very scared, but wanted more. At the end of our call, he told me that he would contact me again one day, that I would hear from him. And I told him I didn't know. I mean, how did I know what he told me was true? How did I know all these things? And he told me that he knew where I was. Now that scared me because back then, remember, we had no internet. We had nothing. We had just moved to this new home. My husband had left 2 weeks earlier and I was scared. You can believe that after that call, I went around and made sure my doors, my windows were locked. I made sure that I continued to look around the house. So fast forward a couple weeks as we got closer to Halloween, because we had this conversation about Halloween and what it was and what it meant in Europe in the earlier years, hundreds of years ago, coming into now. I told him how I loved Halloween. Many of us do. And he said, I think that's fascinating, and told me that he would let me know how he was. So now fast forward, it was about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, and it was Halloween night. I was preparing for a big night on the line because that's always what happened. I would have a huge night on the psychic line, people getting spooked, because they also knew that I was a paranormal investigator as well as a psychic. The air turned a little weird. My cats started to hide. I had 3 cats, Tippy, Canoe, and Tyler. I mean, after all, we lived in President Monroe's descendants' house, right? So it was Tippy, Canoe, and Tyler too. So Tippy, Canoe, and Tyler hid. They were hissing, they were hiding, and all of a sudden, it was so quiet. You could hear a pin drop. And we lived in a neighborhood, and it was just silent. Then I started hearing some dogs. And the dogs were barking and howling and carrying on. And literally, I sat in the house with my lights off so I could see outside better. And I kept looking. And I had my phone near me in case I needed to call. And I kept checking the phone to see if I had a dial tone. Well, things started to calm down. And as things started to calm down, I relaxed a little bit. And then I just carried on my shift and pretty much put it behind me. The next day, I went outside to get the mail. And as I walked out the front door, there on my front step was a pair of those plastic vampire teeth. the kind of kids wear, you know, trick or treat. I didn't really think too much about it, but it was a pair that looked older, that had been around for a while. And as I picked them up and looked at them, there was scratched into the top between the two teeth, the two vampire incisors there, was scratched a heart and the letter J. Now, that went through me like a shot, and I had those teeth for years, and as the time went on, I moved, things got lost, and I wish I still had them. I started looking around and went to the library a few days later. Started asking the librarian about things. She looked at me a little funny because I kind of told her a little bit of the story, so I knew I wasn't able and should not tell her everything. I found information on a jack, all right, from New Orleans, from the 1700s and even the 70s. The name of this man was Jacques Saint Germain. He was a famous vampire who had a very, very famous incident in New Orleans. I'm going to invite you to look that up. Now, is this real? I hope so. Could it be an elaborate hoax? It could be, but I don't see how it could be, honestly, because, well, it would have been very difficult to carry that type of thing off. I actually called the call center where the calls were forwarded to. And when I asked about my call with Jack, after several minutes, came back on the phone and said, "We don't know where the origin of that call came from. We have a record of the call, but we don't have an origin of that phone call." So could it be coincidence? Could it be a hoax? Oh, a hoax, sure, absolutely. But what if it wasn't? I'd like to think that it was not. What if it just wasn't an elaborate hoax? What if? I've always thought I would get a call from him again someday. I haven't yet. But Jacques, if you see this, just know I sure would love to hear from you again. Thanks so much for watching, but I have a little bonus content for you. So what I would like to do is put these cards away, and I would like to give you all just a little general reading. How's that? So we're going to shuffle this, and this is your reading from me and Jack. So here we go. We're just going to lay out a couple of cards, and here we are. Ready? That's more than a couple, but we're going to keep going because this is looking pretty good. My friends, there's an education here. Someone looks like they're getting ready to go back to school. Someone also looks like they're considering leaving a relationship. I hope not. But there's been some hurt and resentment there. There's been a problem with being able to put the past behind and not carry it over into the current relationship. The problem came from a third party who was interfering in the relationship, and the trust was lost. But I do believe that trust can be gained again with this Ace of Hearts, because it does show that there is harmony and love in the home. So if this resonates with you, I appreciate it. It doesn't resonate with everyone, but if it does with you, please take what does, and I appreciate you watching. One more card, and we're going to get the final message, and that is this the Queen of Spades. This Queen of Spades tells me that there is someone in your life that is going to help you through this time period. And it also looks like financially. it does look like this is the final card. I'm going to let it rest there. There is a fulfillment and a contentment that will come after you work through this time. I wish you well on this. But thank you so much for watching. I had a great time telling you this story. I don't know. What do you think? You know, it's one of those things that you just even hate to tell it. But it was so intriguing, I wanted to tell it to you. Is he the vampire, Jacques Saint Germain? I'm going to say, yes, he is. I appreciate you. Thanks for coming to Dark Tales of Zelda, and I'll see you next time with another story just for you. See you next time.